Good afternoon.
Hello, Phil.
Dave.
How you doing, bud?
Oh, we're knee deep now in this session. We're
Yeah,
at
yeah.
session 4,
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about faith on display in this session. And today we are talking about faith on display in your conversations.
Right.
Words mean things.
James is getting where he's kind of wanting to step on her toes, isn't he?
He's meddling.
Yes,
he's meddling a
is.
little
Yes,
bit.
he is.
JR, the writer of this study, said that it's estimated that people spend 52 minutes a day talking about someone.
Yeah.
Now, that's somebody doing a lot of talking, don't
Yeah.
they? I won't talk 52 minutes a day, maybe 5.
Yeah. There you go.
But they talk about somebody that's not present in their conversations. In other words, they spend an hour a day gossiping.
Right. Right.
I don't
Most
know
of it's
if
probably not positive, right? Some of it might be. But
Well, they said that 10% are flattering,
okay.
75% are neutral, and 15% are negative.
Yeah. Huh.
Now, I don't know where they got, this was
Pole or something.
no, it was a Lifeway study.
Okay. Okay.
Lifeway did a study, and that's what it was. Most of the time, people don't hear what's being said about them, but what if they did? Huh?
Yeah.
A woman named Ramona relayed a story to the writer of this lesson, and she talked about her friend Michelle, who had went to this conference, and they had this business lunch, and Michelle and another woman went to the restroom, freshened their makeup,
Mm-hmm.
and they were in there, and while they were in there, they started talking about this one coworker named Beth. And as they weren't in the 75% that were neutral.
It wasn't flattering either, was
They
it?
weren't the flattering part.
Right.
They were giving her down the road because of the things that this lady had done that caused misery for their team.
Yeah. Hmm.
And anyway, this went on for a couple minutes, but then they thought they were alone. But then one of the stall doors opened, and out walked Beth, the source of their little gossip party. Make a long story short, Beth walked out of the business luncheon, walked off the job, and Michelle never saw her again. Have you ever had a time when you said something that you knew you shouldn't have said, or you
Phil, sometimes we even know it before it gets out of our mouth, and we start trying to draw it back in before it even gets out, but it's too late at that time. It's already started out the door.
well, James addresses the two sources here. It's the tongue.
Right.
It's full of evil, but it can be full of good.
Mm-hmm.
And godly wisdom. A tongue controlled by godly wisdom, much more likely to create a result that God would be proud to see in us,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa. A tongue that is not controlled by that, but other things that James will talk about, can get us in trouble. It can also hurt people. It can destroy relationships. So while we talked about gaining wisdom and things in this study, controlling the tongue as a Christian is of the utmost importance, I feel. And
Phil, haven't we all been in positions where we start to say something and we can almost see the other person's face changing as we start to say what we're saying, and you know it's something you shouldn't say, but it goes on, slips out anyway.
Comes out.
We see it coming. We see their anger, the hurt on their face, and that's when we know we've messed up.
And while this study, James broadcasted for all those
Right.
Jewish Christians that he was addressing, but mostly for those who teach.
Right.
So us as Christian teachers, it's especially important for us to watch our words, how we cut up and carry on, and you just never know. You really need to seek God's wisdom when we talk, because we can cause a lot of peril with the tongue. Let's look at the.
Yeah, and it's kind of the same way it would be, Phil, if you're in a leadership position in your workplace. People look to you for guidance and leadership, and you gotta be careful there, because we're actually a teacher there, and so in some sense, we're not teaching the gospel, but we can be sharing the gospel the way we have.
They're like reporters. They want a comment.
Yeah, yeah.
And they want that comment so they can quote you and go out and broadcast that.
Yeah,
And
there you
maybe
go.
twist it their own way.
Right,
To,
right.
to their fellow employees. So yeah, it's a perilous thing.
Yeah.
Misuse of the tongue.
Yeah. Let's see what he says here in James chapter 3, verses 1 through the first part of verse 5. James says, "Not many should become teachers, my brothers, because you know that we have received a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature, able also to control the whole body. Now, if we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we direct their whole bodies. And consider ships, though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things." We've seen throughout the study, Phil, that James doesn't go into a lot of theology, but he teaches us about the practical nature of Christianity and how we should live our Christianity out in our lives. And I think he knows the problem in the church with teachers and leaders, and as we see a little later on, everybody not being able to control their tongue. They couldn't control what they were saying, the thoughts, the expressions that came out of their mouth. It's odd, it's not odd, but it's unusual. James wrote more about the power of speech than any other New Testament writer, although he had a book that was 5 chapters long. He said more about it than any of the rest of them did. So he knew there was a problem there.
There was a problem in the Jewish church.
Jewish
wasn't
church, and he was trying to resolve that problem. Jesus himself, though, also says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, he says, "I tell you that on the day of judgment, people will have to account for every careless word they speak." He didn't say teachers have to account. He said people, believers, have to have an account for every careless word they speak. There might be a book on my side, I feel, where the careless things I've said and the words I've spoken that I shouldn't. There's probably a pretty good sized volume of that.
It's not nice to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. And Jesus didn't, like I said, he didn't say teachers. He said all people.
Yeah.
All of us need to choose our words carefully choose the things we say. Here James said that we shouldn't all be teachers, as we've already said, but he also then talks about all people in other places in the story. If we can control our tongue, Phil, will be mature and control our body, as he says there in verse. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature. If we're able to do that, control our tongues, it will be a mature Christian in the way we live our lives. Not many of us are there. And then he talks about, he talks about the horse and the bit. At the same time I was reading this lesson or studying it, 2 grandsons were in the car, and the oldest one asked me, Noah's upset with me because he asked me a question, and I told him the truth. He asked Adam if he could play. If Adam thought he could play a game well, and Adam told him, "No, I don't think you can." a computer game. He said, "Should I have told him the truth?" And I had to ponder that for a while, because there are times when the truth hurts somebody, but you always tell the truth. But I told him, I said, you could couch it like this. Well, maybe you don't answer that question, but you say, I really don't want to, but if you do, this is, I'm gonna tell you how I feel about it. I'm gonna tell you the truth. I'm not gonna lie to you, you know. But even things like that, Phil, are sometimes hard for us to, as Christians, to answer those type questions. When someone asks us something like that, what should I do, or am I doing the right thing? We gotta be careful how we say that, but we also need to tell the truth.
But for one thing, we don't know all the ins and outs. You talking to one party, and you don't know all both sides of the story.
Well, I went on to tell him the fact that our tongue, even though it's a small part of our body, can control our body. It's like, I told him, it's like, I said, do you know what a bit is? And he said, well, I don't know exactly what it is. I said, well, a bit's what you put in a horse's mouth, and a bit's probably weighs 2 or 3 ounces, and yet it controls a horse that could weigh 2,000 pounds. Same way with our tongue. Our tongue can control our body, even though it's a small part. And I talked about it, the rudder on a ship. And that's what James did here. He gave 2 examples, the bit in the horse's mouth and the rudder on a boat. But our words, he goes on in the next verses after this field, talks about the fact that a small spark can create a giant fire.
We know that.
We know that, don't we? Our words are like a small spark that can start a huge wildfire and cause criticism, destructive gossip, and sarcasm.
He's setting them to thinking about this. He's wanting it to be in the forefront of their thinking. And we'll find out later on about the thinking. That drives the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah. The writer talks in about it. Yes, you're exactly right, it does. Besides gossip, criticism, what about lying? He goes on to talk about the effects of lying, slander, and a careless word are difficult for people to understand, are hard on people who receive it in an unloving manner.
Yeah.
Carefully chosen and powerful words are great, but all words are powerful, and they can destroy relationships and even people's reputations. So we got to be careful what we say and the manner in which we say it, just like and try to control our tongue, as James says here, like the bit does the horse. Then we should control our tongue so that we don't go out and do the things that God doesn't want us to do and say the things God doesn't want us to say. Tongue's a small part of the body, but it can cause a lot of problems.
It's crazy. Wars have started with a small tongue.
Yeah. We need to turn our control of our speech over to God.
Yeah.
And we have trouble doing that sometimes.
Other writers in the Bible talk about the tongue, how it can be a snake, sharp as a snake's bite, or poison, venomous as a snake's bite, or something like that. An open grave, a viper's venom, different things that they say about the harmful effects of the tongue, but at the same time, driven by godly wisdom,
it can be great.
It can be wonderful.
It's as powerful on the good side as it is on the bad side.
You and I both experienced the opposite, where somebody comes along and gives you that little word of encouragement, or they give you a little pick-me-up, or perhaps share a little story. Other Christians share a little story, and it really makes you feel good. It really gives you a whole new outlook on your day and a different attitude. In verses 9 and 10, he talks about another aspect of the tongue. He says, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. He says, my brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. There's no metaphors here. He's clarifying his meaning. Evidently, there was a problem within the Jewish Christian sect of doublespeak and inconsistency in their witness with their speech. And undoubtedly, James had observed this, and he said this blessing and cursing coming from the same mouth. It really points to a double-mindedness that's not of Christ. So the tongue's capacity to offer cursing and offer blessing, it represents this conflict that James has with his church here. So he points out to the inconsistency. And first he talks about how people are made in God's likeness. So are you going to curse God? Well, no, they would say. But when you curse someone who's made in the image of God and made by God, how can that be right? So if you use the tongue as a form of worship and then turn around and slay somebody with your tongue, he says it should not be.
And what does that do to your witness?
Well, it destroys
It
it.
destroys your witness.
It certainly degrades it where you wouldn't be as effective as you could be to the number of people that you could be. Jesus prohibited cursing people by saying to bless those who curse you.
Right,
Didn't
right.
he? One can't pretend to bless one person, God, or a person, and while they curse the representation of that person as a human. So James is observing here this blessing and cursing coming out of the mouth. It shouldn't be. But here's James imagining his worshipers coming out of the assembly. Did you see so-and-so in there? Did you see them sandals he's wearing?
What's he doing wearing that?
Did you see his feet? I wonder when he washed his feet last. I can't believe he come to the temple that way. These things go on, and you know they go on, but it makes us a hypocrite. Who do they think they are not washing their feet coming into the assembly? He says, point blank, these things should not be this
Right.
way.
No ifs and buts there, is it?
There's no way around his addressing it. He's addressing it to his people, the double-mindedness, the fickleness, the words that flow from our mouths. There's no way that it should be this way. Our speech will either reveal that we're mature, like you said, or it's going to reveal immaturity. And as the Holy Spirit works in us and purifies our hearts, we like to think that the speech coming out is going to be a blessing to somebody. In the next verses, we see that God's wisdom is what we need to direct our speech.
Yeah.
Those
He says in verses 13 through 18, now who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct he should show that his works are done in the gentleness that comes from wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good works, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. James changed his subject a little bit. He talks about wisdom again. We talked about wisdom, Phil, in the first session in this series of lessons.
You know what I found funny, though, when he says this, and he had just said in a few verses earlier that we should not think ourselves wise. And then he turns around and said, who among you is wise and understanding? Well, I wouldn't open my mouth, would
No,
you?
no, wouldn't raise your hand on that.
Not
would you?
after he had said that other.
He's talking about a kind of wisdom here, though, that's godly wisdom, is what he's talking about.
Sure.
And it impacts our words and our conduct. I think he's saying here that if we're wise, act wise, and exhibit godly wisdom, we're not gonna have a problem with our tongue that we do otherwise, we will be able to control our tongue to some extent if we have that godly wisdom. Godly wisdom will be seen in our works and our words. That's what he says there. By his good conduct, he shall show his works are done in gentleness that comes from wisdom. On the other hand, if envy, selfish ambition rule us, then our behavior will be earthly, unspiritual, and demonic.
That's a pretty rough,
But
assessment.
so he's telling his fellow believers that they're earthly, they're unspiritual, they're demonic. He's letting them have it, isn't he? Both
Yes, he
barrels
is.
here.
Yes, he is.
But then he gives us a list of attributes or characters of godly wisdom. These are the ones we need to exhibit, Phil, rather than the earthly, unspiritual, and demonic characteristics. He says we should be pure, without moral defect. We know none of us are there. We know we're striving to be there, but we're not there on our own. We should be peace-loving. We should be seeking the best for others and not be selfish. We should be gentle, gracious, and patient with others. We should be compliant. In other words, we should be reasonable and excuse me, Phil, and agreeable without compromising the truth of the Bible, scriptures. We should be full of mercy and good fruits. In other words, display kindness, and goodness. We should be unwavering, steady, resolute, and impartial in our actions toward other people. We should be without pretense, genuine and sincere in our actions. We do those things, then God's wisdom will empower our speech, and our conduct will honor him. If we do those characteristics rather than the characteristics of the earthly folks, which is unspiritual and demonic.
And you know, what's it mean there, Jay, when he's talking about without pretense?
Don't put
your
on the
speech?
shows.
Yeah, or have an agenda, a hidden agenda while
Okay.
you're trying to speak to someone about something. When we relay the spiritual side of things, we're just to put the facts out there, not convince people, but show them that these are the facts. Christ came. Christ died. He died as a savior for all of us. So many times when people speak, it is with a hidden intent to convince them of something. And I think it's one of the things that he was addressing there.
The message of Christ can be simple. This is what Christ has done for me. Christ came to do this, and this is what he does for me on an everyday basis.
The writer in the book that I use talked about memorizing Philippians 4:8. He said, if you memorize that, and what does it say? It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, and if there is anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. Dwell on those things, not the gossip,
Not gossip.
the latest news, how we should be reacting. And you know, as we look at this study, if we can't remember what we're thankful for, people who have talked with us with that godly wisdom, think about it, write it down.
Yeah.
It makes a good tool for your witness and for sharing your witness. And then every day you can have a journal and spend a few minutes each day writing about people you're grateful for. And then if you have had one of those situations where you misspoke and where you've perhaps used words in a twisted fashion and maybe didn't represent the truth or maybe didn't act in a godly way, apologize to that person, set the record straight. It's never too late to do the right thing.
Right. Has our speech changed throughout our Christian walk?
Oh, I hope it's getting better.
I have. I know mine has. I know it's different than it was. It's not there yet, but it's different than it was.
Yeah, I like to think so. As they say, blessing and cursing shouldn't come from the same mouth, from the same heart. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate your viewing us and ask that you come back and join us again next week. Thank you.